Tonight, the Western alliance against Putin flexes its muscles, but can it pack a punch? Rishi Sunak joins with the German Chancellor and promises to support Ukraine for as long as it takes, but faces questions about how he can deliver his multi-billion-pound defence pledge. President Biden signs the bill giving billions to Ukraine and promises that equipment will be sent in the next few hours. Also tonight, trouble on the home front. The government under fire over its housing policy, accused by one of its own MPs of betraying the last Conservative manifesto. The former DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, is released on bail after appearing in court charged with historical sex offences, which he contests. A compassionate man and a great parliamentarian. Tributes from across the political divide for Lord Frank Field, who's died aged 81. And as the deputies trade barbs at Prime Minister's questions, we look back at other times the stand-ins try their hands at stand-up. All that and more with Sunda Katwala and Liam Fox, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday. I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, Rishi Sunak spent the day on the stage where some believe he's most comfortable, the international one. But travelling to Poland and then to Germany, the Prime Minister announced he wants to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2030, £75 billion in extra funding for the armed forces. In many ways, this can be seen as a move with an eye on the US. European leaders know that if they want to convince America to keep up its support for Ukraine, well, they need to show it's not just US taxpayers who are paying their share. As Rishi Sunak put it, we can't keep expecting America to pay any price if we ourselves are unwilling to make greater sacrifices for our own security. But underneath the apparent unity on the need for more defence investment in a more fragile and dangerous world, well, frankly, there are some cracks. Europe is still very divided when it comes to defence spending, a patchwork of different policies and priorities. And who knows what will happen in America before the US election that could see President Trump back in the White House. And here in the UK as well, politicians are still trying to work out if it's really possible to put the country on a war footing without having to slash public services. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the Prime Minister's pledge will increase cuts to unprotected government departments by about £8 billion in 2028. Although, if the polls are to be believed, that's unlikely to be Rishi Sunak's problem. It might be Labour who has to find the cash. Well, our political editor, Beth, Rigby, has been travelling with the Prime Minister and she sent this report.
Old allies meeting to draw up a new defence framework in uncertain times. The red carpet rolled out. This, the Prime Minister's first official visit to Berlin, marking a new formal bilateral defence partnership. With Europe at an inflection point, this show of strength, all the product of careful coordination. No coincidence, then, that the PM's European tour comes as the US finally agrees to a multi-billion-dollar package for Ukraine. And this pair keen to focus the world's attention back towards their borders.
This
decision shows that Putin miscalculated when he believes that the states in Europe, the Western states, the US would at some point let Ukraine down. We will never do that. But I will also be very clear the decision of the United States does not release us in Europe here from our task to further enhance our support to Ukraine.
At this dangerous moment, the bond between our two nations is stronger than ever. We meet as a war rages on our continent and new threats are rising around the world. And together we will continue to provide unwavering support for our Ukrainian friends.
That support costs. After yesterday's announcement of a UK commitment to raise defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2030, questions at home over the PM's priorities in the midst of creaking public services.
We have made a choice, and I'm not shying away from that choice. All governing is about prioritising. I've decided to prioritise defence because I think that's the right thing to do for our country. It's a completely funded plan. If someone is telling you that's the wrong priority, they should explain why they think that's the case when it's very clear that the international environment is changing.
This trip had two aims. Allies in Europe, flanked by the US, showing the world they're squarely behind Ukraine come what may. The PM's other aim was to make defence spending a key election plank. Now, many of you at home may want that money spent on other public services, but the message from the Prime Minister to you and Labour is that it's a fight he's willing to have.
A few times I'm grateful to be as short as I am, actually.
These spending decisions affording Rishi Sunak's stature on the world stage and in the barracks in Berlin, where the PM was shown new military equipment being developed by the Germans and Brits. Leaving Berlin with a deeper security partnership agreed in writing, the PM will feel this is a job well done. Back home could feel very different as voters prepared to go to the polls in the local elections. Beth, Rigby, Sky News, Berlin.
Well, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The Director of British Future, Sander Katwala, and former Defence Secretary, Cillian Fox. Good to have you both with us. What do you make of the PM's announcement? Is it the right one?
Yes, it's absolutely right. A number of us have been arguing in private that this has been necessary for a long time. In a way, defence is not discretionary spending. You have to spend what you need to spend to keep your country safe, and you can't choose what the international environment's going to be like. And I was asked a question earlier on Sky News today, well, so who is the biggest enemy? And the fact is that you can't choose who your enemies are. We face threats from Russia, from China, from Iran, all at the present time. And you can't say, I only want to deal with one of them. If there's a bigger threat, you have to actually spend more money on that. And the thing about defence is, and as a former Defence Secretary, I very well understand that a lot of these programmes are not things that you can turn on and turn off overnight. They take time. Therefore, you need predictability in the funding stream coming through, which is why you need to know what's happening in the next 5, 6, 7 years.
On that, is that where the Conservative Party's been a bit asleep at the wheel? You say you need predictability in funding. There's lots of people who look at the army, they think it's been hollowed out. They say that we're not in a state where we can meet the threats in this world. Should you not have fixed the roof when the sun was
There's a lot
shining?
more than the army to security.
Yeah.
And I think that with the increase in funding that we've given to 50 billion, an all-time high in our defence spending, but it's also what you spend the money on. And I'm afraid that the argument about is the army big enough is not going to be sufficient to deal with the threats that we face in cyberspace, perhaps from space, and from other types of adversaries. We need to think about Britain as a maritime nation. 94% of our trade comes by sea. Therefore, there's a strong argument about actually building up the Navy more.
Have we spent enough on defence under the last 13 years of Conservative government?
Yes, I think we have.
Okay.
Because it alters depending on the threat scenario that you face. And in 2010, when we conducted the Defence Review then, we took the view that it was a relatively benign period and we could take more risks. This is now a much less benign, much more dangerous period where not only can we take risks, we actually have to build up our defences more.
Sandra, I want to bring you in because you've been looking at the kind of funding of this, if you like. And look, it's a very, very difficult economic climate, isn't it? £75 billion is an awful lot of money. I mean, to put it in context, I think the education budget annually is about 60 billion. Do you believe the sums? Do they add up?
Well, it's 2030, so this is the first sort of sixth term pledge we've got from this government, but we're 6 months away from finding out if they get a fifth term or not. And so these will be decisions for future governments. I don't think it makes any sense to say it's fully funded because you'd need to have a strategic defence review and a comprehensive spending review to see how all the bits fit together. If you make this an absolutely firm commitment, then you've made a lot of spending decisions that you haven't made and that will be very difficult to make. So I think the aspiration is probably shared across parties. I think you see an enormous contrast between British politics and American politics in an election year. Because in America, you've got a knife-edge election and actually a totally different worldview. If Biden was in power, you'd probably get a sort of traditional transatlantic relationship. If Trump was there, you just get unpredictability. And we saw people like Liam who care a lot about the transatlantic relationship. You see the Congress being carried, but with two different Republican parties in the Congress. I think here, with David Cameron as Foreign Secretary, Keir Starmer was the opposition leader, you see quite a broad mainstream consensus on wanting to do this sort of thing, and then a challenge really of taking the public with you about how you afford it and how you spend it.
And it takes us to a different debate now, which is, not whether we should have more defence spending, but how we spend extra funding. What should the priorities be? What are the big international risks? What are the risks to the United Kingdom that we need to deal with first and foremost? And then what are the risks to our allies that we need to be part of the solution for? It's absolutely right that a great deal of that depends on the United States. People forget that the American defence budget is bigger than the next 10 put together. So it's bigger than Russia plus China plus Britain plus France plus Saudi and everyone else. So it's the only country that's really going to have the full spectrum of military capabilities. And there's another debate, I think, to be had now in NATO, which is that even if NATO is carrying its full share, who does what in NATO? Because there's no single European economy big enough to have the sort of full spectrum that the United States has. So are we going to specialise, or are we going to try to spread the jam too thinly in a lot of European states, which actually won't help our capability? When Robert Gates was American Defence Secretary and I was Defence Secretary, we used to have a double act that we called bad cop and worse cop, lecturing some of our European colleagues but not spending more. But we've seen a change in that. With the current Chancellor in Germany, we've seen a big uptick in German spending. And I think it represents a view across continental Europe that following what Putin did and following what's happened in Iran, that the level of the threat, I think, is getting through to people in a way that it's not had for a long time.
We have been talking about the US election. You brought it up in the very different paths we could see, depending on who wins that election. If Donald Trump is the next president, how do you think Labour are going to deal with it? Because I have to say, if you look at half the shadow cabinet, they've not exactly been talking about him in glowing terms over the last few years.
I don't think anyone in British politics, to give you their real view, would talk about Donald Trump in glowing terms. Boris Johnson was scathing about him. And then he was Foreign Secretary and then he was President. You'd have to deal with it. So I think they will just take the view that you have to deal with the cards that you've got. But whichever government it is in Britain, it is just much, much more unpredictable to deal with a Trump administration because also of the congressional politics of the Republican Party, which is both, transatlantic and isolationist, than if you're dealing with the new coalition that's broken out across the parties.
But I think on the positive side that we've seen throughout history, we know that post-war, the UK-US relationship on security, what we call the special relationship, is probably the most important security relationship on the planet. And we've learned from history that Labour governments will get on with Republican administrations, Tory governments will get on with Democratic.
Do you think it's still the most important in the planet?
Yes.
Or is that just us, telling ourselves that we're
I think it's the most important security relationship. If you've actually sat behind the desk and you can see just how much American security information is shared with the United Kingdom in a way that it's not shared anywhere else, you can see the importance of that.
OK, thanks both very much. Really interesting discussion to start the programme. Now, the former DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, has been released on bail after being charged with historical sex charges. He appeared earlier at court in Newry. Now, his wife, Eleanor Donaldson, has also been charged with aiding and abetting. Sky's senior Ireland correspondent David Blevins now reports.
The focus of attention for all the wrong reasons. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson arrived to face 11 historical sex charges over a 21-year period. 1 of rape, 1 of gross indecency and 9 of sexual assault. His wife Eleanor, who was arrested with him, faces 4 charges, including aiding and abetting. The couple sat in the dock of courtroom number 3, separated by 1 prison officer and flanked by 2 others. A detective sergeant said police believe they can connect the accused with the charges. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson and his wife Eleanor each spoke just 3 times to confirm their name, to state their date of birth and to indicate to the court that they understand the charges they're facing. The 61-year-old is the former leader of the DUP and Northern Ireland's longest-serving Member of Parliament. He played a pivotal role when the party held the balance of power at Westminster. Released on bail on the condition there's no contact with witnesses, 58-year-old Lady Donaldson left the court without making comment.
Stand back, please. Jeffrey! Stand back.
The crowd outside had become much more vocal by the time her husband stepped out,
Back in again.
forcing him to retreat to the courthouse for a short time for his own safety. Police had to reinforce their defensive lines to give him safe passage from the building. The case is back in court in 4 weeks' time. David Blevins, Sky News in Newry.
We can return to our top story this evening, and joining us now is Jeremy Quinn, who's the chair of the Commons Defence Select Committee. Good to have you on the programme today. Do you welcome the announcement then of the 2.5% target by 2030?
Very much so. It's necessary. We're living in a very volatile, very dangerous world, but it's very good to see a date on that, and it's being phased over time, so industry and our allies will be able to see that ramp up in British investment in defence.
The government wants to pay for the policy by reducing the civil service by 70,000. Now, you worked in the Cabinet Office, so you dealt very closely with the civil service. I mean, where's the fact? What are the areas of the civil service where they could actually sustain getting rid of 70,000 jobs?
Well, you'll be aware that coming from a defence perspective, as the chairman of the Defence Select Committee, I'll focus on the announcement from a defence perspective, and that's something to be absolutely welcomed. Happily, I'm in a situation where others in government will have to work out how to find the money to deliver it, but it is funded.
Is that realistic, though? What do you think? It sounds like a lot of jobs to me.
The government would not be saying that unless they believe that they can find those resources over a 6-year period, which is what we're talking about here. And I believe from what the government's been saying, it means taking the civil service back to where we were pre-COVID. So that can't be an impossible task, but it's for the government to find the funds. I'm delighted that the funds are being committed to defence.
You obviously chair the Defence Select Committee. I was reading the report from February where you say, the government risks being unable to build true warfighting and strategic readiness because of the sheer pace of operations. What do you mean when you say that?
All our armed forces are being continuously stretched. So there is so much going on in the world. And we have been used to our armed forces doing brilliant things globally. They need to continue to do that. But right on our doorstep in Europe, there is a live war going on. We need to be able to do more, train more with our NATO partners and make certain we've got the munition stocks and the personnel to be able to reach the challenge of be able to deter the risk of a prolonged high-intensity war in Europe.
Because it feels a bit like you're saying, the threat's here, it's now, it's gathering pace. Is 2030 too far in the distance?
This is a phased increase. So if the government had said, don't you worry, in 2030 we'll be at 2.5, but we're flat until then, I'd be worried. What they're talking about here is a linear increase in defence spending over time. That will actually be helpful for defence. It takes time to place the orders. But if you are sitting in UK industry at the moment, in the defence sector, this is a good green light to invest in capital and invest in R&D. And if you're our NATO partners, this sets a new benchmark. 10 years ago, we were all about 2% of GDP on defence. This shifts that benchmark towards 2.5%. And if we can get that triple whammy of defence from the UK government, defence from investment from industry, and investment from our NATO partners, that will send a really clear message.
I guess some might be feeling, is there a risk that we're always slightly behind the pace here? We're playing catch up. In the report, you say the increase in global instability has coincided with a period of decreasing recruitment and reduced industrial capacity. So that decreasing recruitment, that happened on your watch, the Conservative watch. Are you responsible for it?
Well, there's been a very vibrant job market, and in that job market, you've got to fight to get the best recruits. There was a significant increase in pay for the armed forces last year. But I think this will be today's announcement will be a really encouraging signal to those considering a career in the armed forces. It feels like,
you're saying, you weren't prepared for this increase in global instability, this period of global instability. So, do you take responsibility for it as a party?
What is absolutely right is that post-89, post the fall of the Berlin Wall, we took a peace dividend. That was the right thing to do. The world was safer, it was less volatile. What has happened over the last few years, we've seen it most starkly with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with what's going on in the Red Sea at the moment with the Houthis, with the rise in tension in the Indo-Pacific. That is a signal that we really have to be upping our game on defence, and we're rising to that challenge.
How concerned are you about the prospect of Donald Trump being the new President of America potentially pursuing an isolationist policy? We know he's sceptical about NATO. We know that he's unhappy about the fact that, as he sees it, partners in Europe and elsewhere are not paying their way.
Well, whoever's in the White House, we in Europe need to be doing our bit as well. So I do think this sends a powerful signal to the US that we in the UK are increasing our commitment to 2.5%. I hope that'll be matched by the likes of Germany and France and others.
Do you think they need to do a bit more, other European allies?
I think all of us need to be doing more. If the whole of NATO comes up to 2.5%, some are already above it. Poland's above that level, clearly the United States is as well. But if all of us get up to 2.5% minimum, that's an extra £140 billion of investment in our mutual defence.
I'll ask again, are you concerned at all about Donald Trump in the White House?
I think there is a long tradition of the White House ultimately recognising where its true interests lie. It is absolutely in the interest of the United States to have a stable and prosperous Europe. They know that they have helped achieve that through NATO for the last 75 years. I'm certain that whoever is in the White House will recognise the value of that alliance, but it doesn't mean that we can coast. We need to be able to do our bit as well, and today's announcement is part of that.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Good to have you on the programme tonight. Well, the story of the defence spending is sure to be featuring in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the associate editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and Claire Ellicott, the Whitehall editor at the Daily Mail. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, with the Prime Minister touring the world stage, it fell to his deputy Oliver Dowden to stand in. We'll take a look at some of the best and worst deputy PMQs. Tributes are paid to the former Labour Minister Frank Field, who's died aged 81. We look back at a truly cross-party campaigner and parliamentarian. A delay to a ban on no-fault evictions. Campaigners say the diluted renters' reform bill will be a failure.
And so I watched as you walk into some bar called the Black Dog and pierced new holes in my heart. You forgot to turn it off.
It's been absolutely amazing, honestly. We've had so many lovely Swifties kind of turn up, book in, rock up. The atmosphere has been intense but amazing, and we've seen such a massive impact already. Within 72 hours, kind of everything's changed for us.
The Black Dog has gone from Vauxhall to global. The speculation has been as to which one of Taylor Swift's ex-boyfriends frequents your pub. Do we know if Taylor's been in? Have you checked the CCTV?
I have to say we have, but, you know, I don't want to give too much away. We do have a certain blonde regular who frequents, let's just say that.
And Taylor Swift is coming to the UK this summer, another stop on a huge global tour. Is there an open invite for her? Is there a couple of pints for her behind the bar?
Please, there's a whole keg. Honestly, we'd love to have her. But, you know, the Swifties have been amazing. We're already booked out for her tour dates. We're thinking about opening, you know, earlier, later as well. So the impact has been immense. The impact on socials have been crazy. You know, it truly is the Taylor Swift effect. But
it's been such a tough time, hasn't it, for the hospitality industry? What does this mean to the Black Dog?
I mean, you know, it has been a tough time. And one of the things that we're so thankful for is this opportunity. You can't plan for this. You can't buy this. You know, it's kind of a one in a million thing. And, you know, we want to honour this kind of opportunity that we've been given, but also keep our identity as, you know, a staple pub in Vauxhall. So we're looking for balance, but we're looking to, you know, embrace the Swifties.
Welcome back. You're watching the Politics Hub on Sky News. The top stories. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak insists his planned increase to defence spending is fully funded as he comes under pressure to explain how the government will pay for it. Labour accuses the government of letting down renters by failing to ban no-fault evictions before the election, despite a ban being a Conservative manifesto pledge. And tributes have been paid to this man, to the veteran former Labour minister and the lifelong welfare campaigner, Frank Field, who's died aged 81. Now you can stay up to date with all the goings on in Westminster on our digital politics hub by scanning the QR code at the bottom of your screen. Among the other stories we've been covering that you can read about there today is this one. 3 men arrested over the deaths of 5 people, including a child who attempted to cross the Channel yesterday. The former Minister, David Davis, has told Sky News that there isn't a single safe prosecution brought by the Post Office in the last couple of decades. And as voters in England go to the polls next week in the local elections, what could the outcome tell us about the general election? We're going to have all the details later in the programme. All that and more, just scan the QR code on the bottom of your screen. Now, campaigners have accused the government of what they're calling a betrayal of renters for watering down a pledge made by the Housing Secretary Michael Gove to ban no-fault evictions before the next election. Now, the proposals are part of the Renters Reform Bill, which MPs have been voting on tonight. Ministers now say any ban must wait for a review of the legal system's ability to hear cases related to the evictions. Sky's political correspondent, Sarina Barker-Singh, reports.
When I got the Section 21, I was, just completely lost.
Tom has called this his home for 6 years, but last summer he was served a no-fault eviction notice, he says, for chasing plumbing repairs. It means now he has 1 month to leave.
I've been uprooted from my home. I've made a home here over 6.5 years, and, I'm now facing having to find somewhere else to live, and rents have increased. I'm going to have to pay more. It's a really competitive rental market, and as it stands, I could be issued a Section 21 notice in my new home.
Around 11 million renters in England were promised in 2019 an end to these Section 21 notices. But since then, almost 1 million private renters were handed them. Today, the Housing Secretary again unable to say when these evictions will be banned.
Existing tenancies are subject to an MOJ review. So when really are you actually abolishing Section 21?
When the bill passes, Section 21 will be abolished, but we also need to make sure that the court system is adequately resourced in order to make sure that we can deal with any referrals from landlords who do need to exercise their remaining powers.
How landlords evict renters is central to what the government say is their once-in-a-generation set of housing reforms. Voted through the Commons today, but not all Tory MPs agree.
We are sending completely the wrong message with dire consequences for future levels of housing supply. We are making an enormous mistake which will reduce long-term lets in favour of short-term lets and result in many properties being taken off the rental market.
I am concerned about the impact of these changes on the property market, because we'd be doing a disservice to renters if we encourage good landlords to leave the market. Then there would be fewer homes available to rent, and rents would continue to rise.
Today marks one step closer to the end of no-fault evictions for new tenancies, not quite the relief for current renters like Tom.
As a tenant, you feel helpless. I seem to have been evicted on a whim of someone frustrated that I was chasing for repairs that would have had to have been carried out at some point. And yeah, it's caused a lot of anxiety. I don't see why.
Well, in the last hour, the Commons has passed the bill through on the nod. Serena's here with the latest. Serena, what's been happening today?
Yeah, so as you say, it's passed through seemingly no dramas, which is interesting because 50 or so Tory MPs semi-threatened to this morning. There were texts flying around. Essentially, they wanted to vote on an amendment that didn't get selected on fixed-term contracts. Now, that wasn't selected. One MP, actually, who wanted to vote for that, texted me saying, let's see what the Lords say. So there's some unfinished business here. This isn't the end of it. But essentially, the dissent are from two camps. So there's Tory MPs on one side, 50 rebels, as I said. Some of them are landlords, some of them are not. They are worried about the knock-on effects of what happens to the private rental market if there isn't a clear-cut Section 21 order that shows the mechanism where landlords can evict their tenants. On the other side, though, you've got campaigners who want stronger reforms for renters. Seemingly, you can evict with 2 months' notice for any reason at all. They think that that's unfair. But what has been in the bill today means you can still essentially get rid of
your tenant, you just have to give them a reason. So you can say you're moving in, you're selling it, and they think that's watered down. They think that's not strong enough. There's also this provision in the bill that doesn't give a timeline. That was something I asked Michael Gove today. There's a report that has to be commissioned by the MOJ to see whether the courts can deal with the cases that might come to court if this Section 21 is abolished, and there's no time limit for that. So those campaigners are worried that renters don't have any kind of clarity on when these Section 21s will actually be abolished.
OK, Sarita, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to speed there. And now, of course, housing is likely to be an issue on the doorstep in next week's local elections that are happening in England. We're looking at what those elections can tell us about the coming general election later in the programme, so do stay around for that one. Now, though, we can hear from Sander and Liam. Sander, to you first. Sometimes it can feel a little bit like, you know, whenever everyone agrees that housing is really difficult, that renters have a tough time, that the market is in a poor state. But whenever these kind of reforms come in, there's always, oh no, we can't do it because of this, or have everyone thought about that?
I'm sure the devil's always in the detail, but I do think housing being up the agenda is part of the politics the next 5 years, the next 10 years now, and I think we'll see some of that at the general election. And beyond, I think it's also new to see renting at the centre of the political agenda. We've often had, you know, the right to buy and what happens. It's got other debates about, you know, freehold, leasehold and so on. So, you know, getting the reforms right will always be contested from both sides. But I think housing is now, you know, a really dominant issue, supply, how much there is of it, the fairness of the different terms. And obviously there's debate about what's fair if you're a landlord, what's fair if you're a tenant, and that will be contested. I think you see Michael Gove as well, you see a Secretary of State in a hurry, really, who wants to leave behind legacy reforms and has to therefore also battle through whatever the different interests are on different sides.
He's failed, though, hasn't he, to get through what he wanted, Michael Gove?
Well, there was a genuine debate here, and I understand both sides, actually. You want to protect people who are renting from being kicked out onto the street for no reason. On the other hand, if you don't give those who own the properties sufficient confidence that they'll get a return over time for their investment, then the chances are you'll get a diminishing supply over private rented property, which actually doesn't do anyone any good. And it's been the back and forward of these two basic ideas as the legislation went through. It ended up tonight, there was no vote on it because no party voted against it. So it's very much now back to the House of Lords to see, you know, how these arguments balance. I think in the end, as somebody who was a bit sceptical about the government's approach to this, that I think they got the balance was right in the end, and you know, that's what Parliament's for in the end.
Do you think the balance is right?
I think on the individual details, you know, they're very detailed points. I think why is the Conservative Party in a way, you know, not rebelling as hard as it could have done from the right? I think it's the big generational challenge they face in politics now. You know, you had the 2019 coalition, which is older than the Labour coalition, but the Conservative coalition has got older again, and I think renters in particular is a big generational issue, and therefore I think both parties have to be interested in the rights of renters.
It is an issue, isn't it, for the Conservatives? The increasing age, because look, young people tend to vote Labour, older people tend to vote Conservative, but the age at which you switch has been getting progressively older. I mean, it's an issue for your party, right?
Well, we'll see. And as we're tested in elections, but I mean, it's always been the case that younger people are more likely to vote socialist, as they say. You know, if you don't vote socialist by 25, you've got no heart, and if you're still voting
were you
socialist
a socialist at 25?
No, I was never a socialist.
Never had a heart.
I bet you're really surprised by that. But you know, I think that one of the other issues about housing is not just the total amount of housing; it's where the housing goes. Because we need to move away. And I think the pandemic's given us the opportunity with a lot of property that was office property in the cities, for example, a real opportunity to translate that into housing, especially lower cost housing in our cities. I think that fits with a lot of the agenda that we have these days about trying to reduce commuters for environmental reasons. So I think the debate, I also welcome this debate on housing and simply getting away from housing numbers and starting to think about the appropriateness of housing.
What's your take on that? Is it about the supply and finding new places where you can build homes?
I think more is going to be really important. And, you know, there are more and less difficult places to do more. You know, I live in Dartford, actually. It's one of the fastest growing places. A lot more you could do in Dartford. And so another place that might be more controversial. Everywhere is going to have to do something. But I do think this is an area where I think there's a lot of pressure on the left, but across the parties, really, to show how you could do that. And I'm sure densification, is definitely part of it.
If you look at a constituency like mine, which is exactly the opposite, 40% of the area in my constituency is green belt, which you can't build on. 30% is floodplain, which you can't build on. So we have to look to see where we can build the most appropriate type of housing, given the constraints of the environment that it's in. And that's going to require local authorities, and it's going to require a lot of the house builders to be a lot more creative than they are at the present time. And one of the secrets, I think, in that is going to be to open up the market to smaller companies, smaller house building companies, who wouldn't take on, the 400 housing estate houses, but might do 10 or 20 in a smaller area. That's going to be, that unlocking that bit of planning, I think, will be key.
Planning reform, absolutely key. Thank you both very much indeed. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, what's at stake in next week's local and mayoral elections? Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, will tell you everything you need to know. And Labour peer Lord Frank Field has died, provoking a chorus of tributes from across the political divide. We'll discuss the rare gift of working with your political rivals. Hello, welcome back. Well, next week is a big one for the Politics Hub, with Thursday seeing 2,500 council seats up for grabs, as well as elections for mayors and police and crime commissioners. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has been examining what's at stake.
The fate of Rishi Sunak, the date of the general election. Labour's ability to win back its heartland. May's local elections really matter. Everyone's involved and gets a vote on May the 2nd if they're in England and Wales. There are more than 2,600 seats up for election in 107 different councils, plus the 25-strong London Assembly. And all of these places, these ones here, are electing new police and crime commissioners. And there is so much at stake for these men and their parties. Why? Well, let's look at what they're all defending. Here are the number of councillors up for election by party. And you can see both Labour and the Conservatives defending nearly 1,000 seats. Look at all of the different seats that the parties are defending. So how should we judge the various parties' performances? Well, we've got Sky analyst Michael Thrasher, and he says that the Conservatives stand to lose around 500 seats, half of their councillors facing election. Labour, well, they could be on course to make around 350 gains overall. And a good night for the Lib Dems, well, that's about 150 gains. Reform UK, well, they're only putting up candidates in about 1 in 8 possible seats, so it's quite hard to judge in the same way. But why do we think May the 2nd is going to be so bad for the Conservatives? Well, let's have a look. Here's the polling when the seats were last up for election in 2021. Now, that was the high watermark of Boris Johnson's political prowess. You can see the Tories back then were in the lead, 43, Labour on 33. And here is where it is now in 2024, much grimmer for Rishi Sunak. Now, Michael Thrasher says that all of that change in opinion means the Tories are vulnerable in around half of the 18 councils they currently control. Labour claim they aren't expecting any direct gains from the Tories. So who's right? At Sky News, here's some of the races that we're watching to work out the bigger picture for ourselves. There's Redditch in Worcestershire. Labour is concentrating firepower on this kind of area because there are so many parliamentary seats nearby, and they're the ones that matter at a general election. Then there's Walsall in the West Midlands. This place is where we're watching to see how Reform UK do. Then there's Gloucester in the west of England. Now, this is one of the few councils we consider are likely to switch directly from the Conservatives to the Liberal Democrats. Now, when looking at the bigger picture, we also have the Metro mayors. You'll recognise lots of these faces. They're some of the biggest outside Westminster, 10 of them. You can see Sadiq Khan for Greater London there, Andy Burnham, he's the incumbent in Greater Manchester, all up for election. But the two most interesting, well, they're the ones in Labour areas held by Conservatives. Andy Street in the West Midlands, Ben Houchen down here for the Tees Valley. Let's look at those two in some more depth, shall we? In the West Midlands, Andy Street, well, you can see he won fairly close last time to Labour. That seat now is on a knife edge. Can he hang on despite the change in the national mood? Then there's this one. This is Ben Houchen's place, Tees Valley Mayor. He won almost 73% in 2021. If there's any sniff of Tory defeat here, then that will be taken by the Tories as an earthquake. Finally, here's a really important result for May the 2nd, and that is the by-election in Blackpool South. Now, this man, Boris Johnson, turned it blue in 2019, but a scandal-hit MP has now quit. So what does that look like? Here's what it looked like in 2019, and you can see why the Labour Party are hopeful. The Tories won last time with a majority of just under 4,000. Will it change control? If it does, it'll be a massive additional blow for Rishi Sunak. Labour want to use May the 2nd to explain why they will go on to win a general election. Tories want to use it to weigh up Rishi Sunak's future. Whatever happens, the political map will change. That's why this vote matters.
Lots going on with those local elections. Next week, we're going to have 2 special Politics Hub programmes on Friday and Saturday as well to tackle the results. Now, tributes today have been paid to the former Labour minister Frank Field, who's died aged 81. He was once asked by Tony Blair to think the unthinkable. He was a lifelong campaigner on welfare, and he served as an MP for 40 years. And during his career, he was remarkable for the cross-party alliances he built to achieve reform. His former colleague, Lord Brunklet, said he was a lovable maverick.
He was respected right across the political spectrum. He was understood to be a lovable maverick, but that didn't mean he wasn't a serious politician. He did very serious things for his constituency, committed to early years for young children, committed to changing the welfare state to make it doable and to get people into work, and to draw down on the financial assets that are held. They're called unclaimed assets held by the financial institutions, which was a scheme he developed with Gordon Brown and has made available hundreds of millions of pounds for investment in young people in particular. So Frank will be remembered for being him and being the grit in the oyster, but he'll be remembered also for great achievements.
Well, senior Conservatives also paid tribute to a truly cross-party parliamentarian. The former Home Secretary, Dame Priti Patel, said, "My thoughts and prayers are with the family of Frank Field. Frank was a kind and compassionate man and a great parliamentarian. His unwavering moral compass, commitment to working cross-party and unshakable principles defined him and will be greatly missed." Former Prime Minister Theresa May said, "Very sad to learn of the death of Frank Field, a great champion of his Birkenhead constituents, courteous freethinker with a deep understanding of social justice and a fierce campaigner against modern slavery. He will be missed." Let's pick up, shall we, with Sander and Liam. I interviewed Frank Field quite a lot over the years, and I found him a fascinating politician. Like, he was a friend of Margaret Thatcher, you know, he kind of was a critic of Tony Blair, he was a critic of Jeremy Corbyn. He was his own man, and it felt to me that he was someone who was always so committed to what he believed, whether or not that was in vogue or not. The poor, early years interventions, things that actually are quite, you know, I think we can all sort of agree the sort of importance of it. I mean, Sander, you knew him, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I first remember reading him at university, and he was a one-man think tank before New Labour, because he had these different positions, very strong on child poverty, very committed to contribution, quite socially conservative. When I met him later, he's a very, very kind man, you know, very committed to these ideas and so on. I mean, we also had the death of David Marquand, the former Labour MP back in the 60s and 70s, was announced yesterday as well. He's another great writer in politics who was a cross-party person, you know, within the Liberal SDP Labour tradition. So I think that sort of force of ideas, but then that commitment to finding the alliances and being willing to, you know, take on your own side, take on the other side, depending on what the issue was. It's very clear.
Do you think we still see this cross-party sort of working together, or is it more difficult now?
I think you do still see it. I think the thing about Frank was you got Frank the man, who, and the same terms keep being used, compassionate, courteous, kind, funny was another one. He was very, very witty and good company. But then you have Frank the politician, who was very driven by ideas. I've never, that I can ever remember, heard him bad-mouthing other people. He would be pretty savage about their ideas, but he would not make it a personal thing. And I think that was one of the great charms about him. It's why he got on so well with people. He didn't personalise politics. He kept it at the level of ideological differences and philosophical differences. And you do still get that. I've just tabled an amendment for the Criminal Justice Bill, and I've got Theresa May and George Galloway both signing it. I mean, there are not that many issues. You'll get them on the same side. It does happen. And it happens when we focus on the issues and not on the personalities. And Frank will be missed, not just Frank himself, but what he represented and the way that he went about politics.
I think there's a lot more appetite for cross-party working than people realise. I think the public are a lot less polarised than the politicians. The politicians, I think, were unusually polarised in that 3 years of Brexit standoff. You actually get beyond that, and actually you can do quite a lot.
I mean, Frank Field voted, I think he voted for Brexit.
He did.
It was a great Brexiteer.
But you almost get a sort of pejorative attack on people who work cross-party in their own parties, or you're all part of an elite and so on. And actually a lot of people, I think, realise you actually get a lot done. I wouldn't be surprised if a centre-left government comes in. They're actually very, very interested in where they can show they've got cross-party support, you know, on different issues, to give themselves a bit more confidence sometimes about being able to make reforms.
Part of it's what we see. I mean, remember, the thing that people watch most in the week in Parliament is Prime Minister's Questions, which is the most, you know, aggressive part of how we operate in Parliament. They don't see committees when people will be swapping ideas and where there'll be compromises being put. And I think there's quite a big argument to see more of Parliament, different parts of Parliament, and not just, you know, the playground fight once a week of Prime Minister's Questions.
Independent thinkers as well. I think that's it, rather than people who are just, you know, reading out the script that they were told by HQ for whatever party. I think is perhaps a refreshing thing as well.
I don't think you would ever have got that with Frank.
No, that's very fair. Thank you both very much indeed. Coming up next on the Politics Hub.
To begin with, it is a pleasure to have another exchange with the Right Honourable Lady in this House, our 5th in 12 months. Any more of these, and she'll be claiming it as her principal residence.
Oliver Dowden and Angela Rayner try their hands at stand-up as they stand in for their bosses at PMQs.
Coming out on the UK tonight at 8, a school in shock in Carmarthenshire as a teenage girl is arrested over the stabbing of 2 teachers and a pupil. Also tonight, the parents of the Nottingham attack victims call for action over the graphic messages exchanged by police officers on WhatsApp in the wake of that attack. I'll be speaking to Grace O'Malley Kumar's father. And rush hour chaos in central London after military horses made a break for it. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight.
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. Cobblers have been pulled up out and are being used as missiles to hurl at these police. Made by people who dare to challenge. Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why? Meeting you. Fishing does have the potential to stymie an enormous economic deal. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. What strikes you when you come to this glacier is not just the way in which the environment is changing, but the speed at which those changes are happening.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, as we've been hearing, the Prime Minister was in Berlin today, so it fell to his deputy, Oliver Dowden, to do PMQs today, taking on Labour's Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner. And predictably, the allegations about Ms Rayner's housing arrangements were an irresistible target for Mr Dowden.
Now, instead of obsessing over my house, when will he get a grip and show the same obsession with ending no-fault evictions?
Well, to begin with, it is a pleasure to have another exchange with the Right Honourable Lady in this House, our 5th in 12 months. Any more of these, and she'll be claiming it as her principal residence.
Now, you might think that these kind of Deputy Prime Minister's questions would be a bit of a sideshow, but over the years, they've thrown up 1 or 2 memorable moments.
Prime Minister once told us he could sum up his priority in 3 letters, NHS. Isn't it more like LOL?
It obviously took a long time to think of that one.
Just to say, I presume you'll want to get onto the budget, because all you're doing is delaying it, Bill about.
I just want to reassure both sides of the House it's one time only that I'm back.
It's all lovey-dovey on the surface. They turn it on for the cameras, but as soon as they're off, it's a different story. They're at each other's throats. Mr. Speaker, they're the Phil and Holly of British politics.
Instead of scoring Westminster points, why doesn't she do the right thing for millions of women around the country?
He's reluctant to answer the question, which is unlike him, because normally when he's asked about numbers and women, he's quite forthcoming.
I'm going to have to go now. I've got a train to catch. She talks about working people. She talks about working people.
Oh, the wink. The infamous wink. I think that was one of my favourite ever Commons moments. Amazing. Yeah, well, I quite enjoy the Deputy PMQs. They do throw up some quite good combinations sometimes.
They do. I mean, it's a bit like going to the theatre. You know, you're expecting a particular lead to come out and you get the understudy.
Yeah.
And you're actually willing them to do well. Because it's their big break. And it must actually be really nerve-wracking. Prime Ministers, you know, will spend hours and hours and hours preparing for it. And then you're coming in as the deputy or the stand-in without the same experience. So, you know, I think fair play to them. It's not an easy one to do.
Any particular sort of standout deputies of times gone by?
Well, I think Angela Rayner is probably not going to punch somebody when we get to the general election, as John Prescott did, of course. But I think she will liven up the general election. I think that's probably quite good for Keir Starmer. He wouldn't have chosen probably this partnership, but it probably helps him actually to have a contrast.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? The idea about going for someone who complements you rather than is your mirror image.
Well, it's not something that he chose. Of course, it was chosen for him by the Labour Party. The Conservative leader will choose their deputy, but not in the Labour Party. And it does, it's very important. And I think the most important one will be something we alluded to earlier, which is the most important deputy, which is who does Donald Trump pick as his running mate in the United States. And that's when it really does count.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm probably not going to go for someone even more, you know, effervescent of a kind of rebel than him, but we'll see. And thanks both very much indeed for a very lively Politics Hub tonight. Good to have you on the programme. Now, that's it from us tonight. I'm going to see you tomorrow at 7, and I do want to tell you about this one because I'm going to be seeing you tomorrow for a Politics Hub special live from our target town of Grimsby, which is discussing why so many people have turned off from politics and what the parties can do to get them back. So we're going to have a live audience, we're going to have 2 candidates. It's going to be pretty exciting. Some exclusive polling as well, just showing the level of apathy and cynicism in the UK. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mee.
It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. A school in shock as a teenage girl is arrested on suspicion of attempted murder following the stabbing of 2 teachers and a pupil. It happened in Ammanford in Carmarthenshire. The school locked down for hours while police dealt with the incident. None of those injured are in a life-threatening condition. Also tonight, the horrifying language in a police officer's messages about the Nottingham attacks. The victims' families call for action over the messages, shared among officers, with one even forwarding them to his wife and friends. I'll be speaking to Grace O'Malley Kumar's dad, Sanjoy. Plus, rush hour mayhem in central London, with spooked military horses making a break for it. 2 of them eventually captured 5 miles away. And reaching for the stars, I'll be speaking to Rosemary Coogan, only the 3rd UK astronaut ever, who's now aiming for a seat on NASA's mission to the moon. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. But first, a teenage girl has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. This is after 2 teachers and a pupil were stabbed at a school in Carmarthenshire. Emergency services were called to Amman Valley School just before midday today, with the school then placed in lockdown while police dealt with the incident. Those injured in the attack are not believed to be in a life-threatening condition. From Carmarthenshire, our Wales correspondent Dan Whitehead has this report.
Emergency services guard the school entrance. At the gates, the parents' worst nightmare unfolds. Reports of multiple stabbings at this Welsh comprehensive. Rachel's 13-year-old daughter Arwen is in a lockdown inside her classroom.
I rang the school and they said they're not allowed anyone in or anyone out, but they couldn't really comment any further than that.
Did your daughter say how she was feeling at the moment?
Oh, yeah, she's scared, obviously. She says she's fine, but they all say I'm fine, but they're obviously not going to be, and what's going to happen from now on, I don't know.
Police and air ambulances were called late this morning to Amman Valley School, which has around 1,500 pupils.
2 teachers